where a lot of ideas are coming from, is feeling like I want to make something that's a little bit like this thing that I love, but a little bit like that. And then there's this experience that I had, or this artist that I, studied their work, and I don't really see that out there, and wanting to enter the conversation and to really and feel like you have a story to tell. I mean, that's just such a simple answer, but like, I just feel like I have a lot of stories to tell.
My name is Wes Gibbons, and welcome back to the Tungsten Originals podcast. You just heard part of my conversation with writer and director Alexandra Pechman. We discussed how her career as a magazine writer led to her career as a filmmaker, her short film Thumb, which is premiering at Fantasia August 10th and 12th, and her latest short film Sleep, which won her a grant from the organization The Future of Film is Female. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy episode 79 of the Tungsten Originals podcast. Allie, welcome to the podcast. How's it going?
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, this is exciting. I found out about you and your work through The Future of Film is Female. You won a grant for Sleep, right? That's the short that you won the grant for?
Yes.
Yeah, so you won a grant for them. I follow them on Instagram, and so they recently announced all of their most recent grant winners. And so I looked you up, and you've had a really cool career, worked on some really big, with some big productions and production companies and stuff like that. But I want to dive into how you got into film and how this became a career that you started pursuing, which I think is interesting. Most people I interview, they know they want to be filmmakers for forever. And I wonder if it's a similar situation for you, because I've read on your website that you started out as a magazine writer with Vogue, the New York Times, and Vanity Fair. So, just walk me through how do you start there and then end up as a esteemed writer and director making great stuff,
Well, that's very generous to say esteemed. But, my career's been still pretty short, and mostly screenwriting and directing is even newer. So, but it's funny where my mini DV camera that I shot little silly movies on when I was 12, my horror movie where my pet dog was attacking a diorama that I made or whatever.
That's awesome. I want to see that.
I actually just converted the footage, and no one
awesome.
will ever see it.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah. But I always was really interested in writing and storytelling. As a kid, everyone I feel who ends up doing this kind of work says that. And then but the thing that was most accessible, I guess, was doing journalism. So I, was super into my high school paper. And then I went to Northwestern for the journalism school, which they obviously have a really great TV and film program, but I didn't do any of that. I did take classes about film, and I was really interested in going to different cinema clubs and took a class on film reviewing. So I wasn't.
Whoa, that's interesting. Wow.
Yeah, it was a really great class, actually. I remember that's when I saw a lot of I saw Dogtooth, and I saw Michel Franco's one of his early movies at the Chicago Film Festival, Daniel Yana. I was becoming more literate.
Film theory stuff.
Yeah. We read a lot of Pauline Kael and things like that. It's funny where now I think back to a lot of little hinge moments where when I was in journalism school, I went to report on Capitol Hill as part of a student exchange program. And I really did not like that and was well, not doing this. And this was in dating myself, the days of when Netflix, you would physically send for the DVD. Obviously, I don't think I'm that much older than you, but micro-generational difference. And it was so exciting because I didn't have to go to the student exchange and pick up the mail. It would just come to our newsroom. I watched so many movies then, lots of, European cinema. And I think The White Ribbon came out around then and had a really big impact on me. And I found out what the Colors trilogy was, different things like that. And so but yeah, I mean, I really just like my goal at that time was to write for magazines.
So it was purely like film appreciation. Like you're just enjoying it. You're not even considering like you could do that one day.
No, I mean, that wasn't, I mean, I'm sure like I sort of thought about, I had written little like plays and things in high school, but they were really bad. And I'd always just like gravitated more toward kind of essayistic short stories kind of thing. I actually studied poetry in college because, you know, if the journalism didn't work out, you have to have a, you know, lucrative backup.
Right. Yeah.
So,
And no better backup than the poetry world.
yeah, I mean, you know, be able to recite an Elizabeth Bishop poem from memory, you are going to
Put
be
that on a
ready
resume.
for the job market. But I did get a job right after college, which was lucky. And I got a job at an art magazine, and I was like basically a fact checker and copy editor. And that was kind of the world that I ended up in. And I'd, you know, taken classes in art history and again been like an appreciator of art, and then really lived in that world for a while.
Yeah. So how long did you live in the magazine writing world?
I mean, I started work like because when you go to Northwestern, it's like very pre-professional. So I started working for magazines like basically while I was still in college, whether that be freelance or you do this thing called like I don't think they call it this anymore, but a journalism residency where you work full time at a magazine. So I worked at the AV Club actually back in the day. And like wondering, I'm like, is anyone like listening? Remember that?
Oh yeah.
I'd like interned at different places like the Paris Review, and then I had worked at a magazine in China. I studied Chinese, and so yeah, it's like, I mean, all told, I don't know, 8 years maybe, like, or 7. It's like hard to judge where it's, but yeah, I mean, working professionally post college, 6 years.
Wow. So that's interesting because that's a large part of a career, you know, like, so it's interesting to change up what you're doing. So I'm curious, when did that change? Like, when did you start thinking of pursuing screenwriting and filmmaking?
So I went freelance, and I had been writing a lot about China, and I had been writing a lot about Brazil. And I had a really amazing job at Aperture magazine, which is like, they're just really awesome and they make amazing books in the magazine. And I really loved it there. But that was like, I had kind of like a dream job in a lot of ways, and I felt not that happy with it. And that was kind of where I thought to myself, the problem is obviously me and not magazines or the industry. And so I actually ended up quitting, and I went freelance, and I moved to Brazil, and I wrote from there. It was like a lot cheaper. And my friends and like community there were mostly people who were filmmakers. And I didn't make any films, but they were working in and around it. They were making like short documentaries. And I remember kind of like watching them and being like, I would have put the camera here, or like, why didn't you edit it this way or whatever? I'm like, oh, interesting. And then shortly after that, I ended up moving back to LA, which is where I grew up, for a number of reasons. But in part, I had a magazine contract here, and then started meeting lots of people, many of whom I had kind of known growing up, who were writing scripts, and started kind of doing that. And then I wrote this kind of like funny magazine article that, like a McSweeney's piece that someone said I should turn into a pilot. And then I did that. And yeah.
Wow, man, that's really cool. So I'm curious if your background in writing gripping magazine articles, if you think that has a really tangible effect on writing gripping scripts, because, and it's like when it comes to like, I assume, I'm obviously never worked in that industry, but I feel like so much of it is like you have to, in the attention economy nowadays, you have to like get people's attention right away. I don't necessarily mean like clickbait, but I mean like it has to be good from the outset and has to make me want to read on to the next like paragraph. In shorts, there are a really similar way. Like if you're going on YouTube looking at shorts, or if you're a festival screener, if the first 30 seconds on it aren't interesting, you're probably not going to watch the remaining like 9 minutes or whatever. So did you like go into writing that pilot feeling confident in your abilities as a writer, or was it almost like a new language that you had to learn?
Not at all. Like, I mean, I remember writing it and someone being like, you should really outline that. I'm like, nah. And then like a few months later, I'm like, why didn't I do that? But you know, a learning experience. And I mean, it's not that similar at all. Like, I think a lot of journalists think it's really similar. And I mean, I honestly feel like the poetry background is more similar to screenwriting, where it's not like there's some decided structure that an article or a journalistic article really needs to take, right? Like it kind of just needs, I mean, especially now where you're not trying to fit into magazine pages, everything's online. Mm-hmm. Like in that respect, yeah, I mean, it feels more like constructing a sonnet or a sestina where certain things need to happen by this point in the story and by this point. And if it doesn't do those things, then it's not a script. It's not a sonnet. Like the, you know, the research phase and especially directing, I think feels a lot more similar to like a journalistic experience where you're going out and gathering string and you're going out and getting the material and getting your clay to shape. And then you bring it back to the editing room or, you know, your desk. And then you work with your editor. Like that feels a little more similar maybe, which is, I think, in part why I really like it. That
pilot that you took the article and converted it into a pilot, what happened with that pilot?
Nothing.
Nothing. That's
fair. And I got a manager, and he was really awesome. Yes, it was. Yes, that happened. That happened, and he was great. He like really helped me a lot, and then I started thinking about wanting to write a feature. In part because, like, I think TV felt kind of opaque to me at the time because I was super used to writing something with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and this is the thing, and I deliver it. And this is the story. And so I felt like I should write a feature. And then I did that. And I was still working pretty much, I mean, yeah, I was working full time as a journalist and doing kind of like brand strategy and copywriting and things to pay the bills pretty much like up until 2 years ago. And then I wrote that script and got agents and then started working.
Gotcha. So I want to talk about Tentacles, which is something that you wrote the teleplay for Hulu's Into the Dark series. And that came out this year, right?
Yes, in February.
Yeah. So I'll read the log line off your website. A young couple falls head over heels into a new romance and entwines their lives until their intimacy transform into something terrifying. I mean, what a company like Hulu to work with. Like, that's just so... That's huge. I feel like whenever I saw that, like that's just an incredible thing. So can you tell me about like how that came about, how you started working with them, you know, just everything about it?
I mean, I've always loved horror films. My dad was a huge horror junkie. He had like, you know, wall to wall DVDs, like watching everything from, you know, in early adolescence, The Shining to Mimic 2 or, you know, whatever. Or The Rats, a movie that has been described as beyond B. And so I mean, like, those are just the kind of movies like that I think like I gravitate toward thinking about making in, you know, in that way, like in some kind of like childhood elemental way. Like The Birds, I feel like was the first thing I ever saw and understood, like, oh, this plot is about killer birds, but like it's really beautiful and scary, and that must be a skill that one might have. It's called directing. So anyway, so that's just to explain, like, you know, I came from the art world and journalism and different things, but I had always had this kind of childhood love of horror from my family. And I was entering into a new relationship when I had moved to LA, and I woke up from this nightmare that, no spoilers, is pretty much what happens in Tentacles. And I turned to my partner and was like, I just had this dream where this happened. And then rather than being absolutely terrified and running in the other direction, he was like, that would be a good horror movie. You should write that.
So how do you go from writing it to like getting it made by Hulu? Was that through your agents and your managers?
I had written for Channel Zero, and one of the executives in that was then at Blumhouse, and it was sent out as a spec, the script, and then she was a really awesome executive and was like, this would actually fit really well with this series, and yeah.
So how did it feel to see this screenplay, teleplay, I should say, that you wrote from like a nightmare turn it into something that is like produced of like tip top production value and like shown on Hulu to millions of people?
It's even more terrifying than
yeah, fair. That's a good point.
It is funny where like people email me and be like, I saw it. I'm like, wait, oh right, it's just
people can see that.
Like,
yeah.
It's interesting with streaming now where it's like, you hear from people a lot later, right? But no, it was awesome. I mean, I learned so much, and I learned so much from our director, Clara Aranovich, and she is just really talented, great shooter, really great person. And I definitely would not have directed a short, less than a year later, had I not watched her working and how she worked with the DP, Sing Hao Yam, who there's just a lot of shots in it that I didn't make them, but I feel super proud of the, collaboration of those, writing, directing, coming together there. And it was, it was fast, and it was also, we had started shooting before COVID and then finished during COVID. So that was wild, but also it felt like it felt really cool to see it come out also Valentine's Day and be resident with what I think a lot of people by then had been feeling, where it's like, I've been stuck with my partner. And I mean, it's about kind of a toxic relationship, right? That becomes too close for comfort. And it felt very weirdly fortuitous that a lot of people have been, either happily stuck inside together, spending all day in bed together, or not so happily, which the movie talks about sort of both sides of that coin.
What do you think was the biggest thing that you learned as a writer from that experience?
Yeah, how to write to direct, for sure, where just, probably some original draft of the script had like so many locations and different, well before, back in my sitting here at this desk. And, but yeah, figuring out how to write to direct and streamlining and, really thinking about a script like you're building a house, and then other people are going to come and put different wallpaper and furniture and, rearrange some things, and like, maybe they'll tear down a wall, but like, hopefully not.
Yeah.
I don't feel like that, but you want to make sure that like you build something super solid so that another, if you're writing for a director, they can come in, and even if they, change all the, feng shui and the ceiling lights or whatever, this is an extended metaphor, but it's still the same house. So I just feel like your job is protecting that kind of integrity more than like, an individual line of dialogue. Well, it's going to be put differently, and an actor needs people come up with something, better. And it's not really, I never really felt like precious about those things, but it's, not really learning that it's not really so much about that.
Yeah. So there was never like a time on set or something that you wished you were in the director's chair calling those shots, or were you fine to like let them interpret it in that way.
I didn't have the experience to even like know what I didn't know, right? Like I really was truly a sponge and feel super grateful that I got to be on set and watch everything because I just learned so much and it was just like just a fully positive experience. And the actors, Dana and Casey are amazing, and other Casey at least too. And like, it was just a really great environment to truly get to learn.
So was the short, you said you wouldn't have been able to make a short later if it wasn't for Tentacles. So the short following, was that Thumb?
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. So Thumb is the short that was able to help you get the grant from the Future of Film as Female for your short film Sleep, like you said earlier. Thumb got into Fantasia, and it's playing. It should be premiering right around this episode comes out. So tickets are in the description of this episode if that's still available. So I'll also read the logline as well from your website. When the daughter of a controversial performance artist inherits her late mother's home archive, an unexpected visitor comes to claim the most notorious artwork, as they discover an artistic legacy can be more of a curse, and which is already a super compelling logline. I need to learn how to write loglines from you. It's like a masterclass in how to do that.
I'm hearing you say it. I'm like, I'm already editing it in my head. But...
Right. Yeah, that's fair. We'll just deep fake your face on mine and you'll read whatever the edited logline is. But Fantasia had some really incredible things to say about it. They said that it is a chiller of a blessing and it resonates a deep unease, and it's also genuinely bloody scary. I mean, coming from a place like Fantasia, which is like the festival to get into for a short like this, that's just really high praise, and it must mean a lot coming from an establishment like that.
Yeah, put it on my tombstone, chiller of a blessing.
yeah, exactly.
But no, I mean, it was really, really exciting. I mean, this is what we worked for. Like, it was a lot of hard work, and Kate Adams, who stars in it, and I have known each other for 13 years. We met our first week of college, and we had always wanted to make something together. I think at that point, neither of us were working in film, but we had always wanted to do something together. And we had really first talked about making a short together almost 3 years ago. And where this all kind of came out of was that when I was writing this other script about the art world, the one that I was talking about before, I interviewed a curator at MoMA, our friend who was working there. And she told me this story about how she was assisting on this show. And there was this artist that architect artist that they really wanted to include, who they couldn't because her sister controlled her archive and wouldn't let anyone see or have access to the work. And I kind of knew about situations like this. It's not that common, but it's pretty, it's a known thing. Like the artist, Jill Magid did a really cool documentary and performance art piece about how like Luis Barragan, the major Mexican architect, like his archive is controlled in Switzerland, and like it's very difficult to access, and these papers and plans and art often is just sort of underground, unable, which feels very ghostly to me. And I'd always been really fascinated by that. And so then hearing this story, I'm like, well, why didn't the sister want to let her sister, the art be seen? This was like a very not well-known woman from Montenegro, like being shown at MoMA would have been a huge deal. And,
totally.
And then it was only after the sister died that they were able to include the work. And I was just sort of like, what must have happened with them? It feels like a way bigger, the stakes feel so much higher than just having some kind of personal grievance. In my mind immediately went to, was the work cursed or haunted? And was there some more paranormal reason? And so I kind of told that idea to Kate, and we started really brainstorming what that might look like. And obviously there's this common trope of dying for your art or, blood, sweat, and tears, but there's also a, whole movement of performance artists in the 70s who literally hurt themselves for their art, like Chris Burden, shoot, he was shot in the arm, or Marina Abramovic, who is like a big inspiration for our character in this, who, you know, she's done performances where people can do anything to her, even like she has a gun on the table in this piece. I think it's Rhythm Zero. I'll recheck it later, where you could slash her arm if you wanted to, and that's part of the performance. And so, or like there's artists like Boz-Jan Otter, who literally did die doing a performance art piece. So like, I just knew about all of this. And there's also this whole tradition of like artist estates that are kind of kept exactly the way that it was when the person died, like Donald Judd Foundation and things like that. So yeah, I just felt like there were all these tropes and spaces that I had encountered that felt really ripe for horror storytelling. And, you know, Kate and I started talking about this, I mean, like end of 2018, and then we got busy and we were doing other things, and then I probably like really in earnest started like putting pedal to the metal to make it at like the beginning of 2020, and then we shot it in October.
Great timing.
Yeah, great. Yeah, that was another thing too, though, was where it was like when that summer moment happened where things were, you know, you could sort of do outdoor dining, and were, tentacles went back up shooting. We were like, we got to do it now, because like who knows when we're gonna get to do it. And we, you know, it was timing wise really good, and so we did it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So going into production, you know, COVID craziness aside, which everyone who's been on this podcast for the past like 3 months has crazy COVID production stories, sadly. But what was something like that was really important to you, knowing that you were going to be the director leading the set? Like, what kind of set did you want to lead? How did you want your crew to feel? Like, what were you kind of thinking of from a leadership standpoint with your crew?
I don't know that I thought about that until afterward. So much. Like, I think especially because of all of the challenges with COVID, and like, I mean, it's really hard to direct in a mask too, where it's like, and also there's so many things that would normally be happening, right? With all the things that you're talking about, where you actually literally cannot meet with people in person as often as you'd like before, or, you know, all hang like normally, and the distancing. So that felt like a complicated thing to figure out. But I mean, I think the most important thing would be like the protecting the actors' creative space. And like, I definitely did a lot of things to make sure that they, you know, because even though horror movies are heightened, and, you know, they're not melodramas with crimes in them, they're in a sort of fantastical space, it's still really real for the actors, and they still have to be seeing and experiencing really scary emotions and things. And so just making sure, I think like the thing that I was most present with was making sure that they were really well taken care of and felt safe and protected. You know, there are also the people who aren't wearing masks.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, I mean, that question feels so, yeah, definitely COVID specific.
Was there a moment on set that you felt you really grew as a director, whether it's like, I feel like one of my things that I love, I should say, like the thing I love most about directing is, you know, some directors prefer post-production over production, and I'm in post right now for my most recent project, and it's awesome. I love like being in the room and putting it together, but I really love being on set and having those like sparks fly, like talking to an actor like between takes, or like we're rolling through, like we're burning pixels and you have like 10 seconds to get the actor there. You know, I feel like that's where you can't like really prep for that. It just happens, like, and that's when you have to really think on your toes. So was there a time like that on set where you thought that you really grew as a director and, you know, allowed yourself to think on your feet in those scenarios?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, at every moment, I mean, it's like it's such that's the easy answer, which is just like
Yeah.
it's such a high octane experience that, you're learning something minute to minute,
Yeah.
second to second because of what you're
Hmm.
capturing, right? Like every second counts. I mean, I think that like probably the biggest learning experience was like, I mean, we had, we finished everything on time, which I was proud of. And then like, the last day we were getting a little behind, we had some complicated aspects of prosthetics and different things that, are just really hard to control. And we were like looking at the shot list and it was kind of like, I don't think this is going to work. And so that at lunch, like looked at it with the DP and was like, okay, like I'm just going to do this and this and less setups. And I felt really, yeah, I think that was like a moment of clicking where I felt like there was some way we were going to do a scare that we sort of reoriented it. And I actually really like it better,
Yeah.
what we ended
Yeah.
up doing. Yeah, a good lesson in two things. Like one, learning that I like high pressure situations and kind of like the more like direly, insanely stressful the situation, I really like to click the pieces together.
Hmm.
Although that wasn't, in the scheme of the world dire.
Right.
And then two, just being incredibly, incredibly prepared and having a really, really, really clear idea of the story and your script, because I think that's what allows for the most flexibility, right? Where it's like,
Yeah, for
you're
sure.
not worried the whole thing's going to fall apart if like we don't do a whip pan, like it's,
Yeah.
like you feel a confidence in that, like, well, I know this story so well, and I know the script and I've broken it down so much that I think that there's a different way to do this, or yeah.
What was your favorite part about post production and putting it together in the edit? Like, were you able to, in the same? I love what you said about how it's all you like it better. What the moment that you had to come up with the decision on the day, because I feel like 9 times out of 10, it's always better than like what you wrote. Or what you had originally planned in the shot list or whatever. But were there any moments like that in post production that you also found new ways to do things that you hadn't planned originally?
Yes. I mean, I think that one of the biggest things that I learned in post is that when you have really good actors, you can cut a lot of
For sure.
lines because
Yeah.
they're doing it with their eyes, and you realize that a lot of things are becoming clear that you didn't necessarily realize, like, where you're trying to protect yourself and make sure that you have it. And so that was really cool to experience, and also to like feel that collaboration with your actors even when they're not actually present, where I tell Kate, like, it was crazy, we don't need this whole thing because you did it with your eyes, it's
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah.
And so yeah, and I mean, doing the music was so fun. Zach, who did the music, Robinson, he does the music on Cobra Kai. He's like
Mm.
farther along in his career than I am. But we went to college together at Northwestern, and actually me, him, and Kate met our first week of college. And so that
Oh,
was
wow.
also like a very sweet and also exciting thing to get to all make something together.
So then, you finish it and it gets into Fantasia, like I've said. How do how does that change things? Because again, that's just a really awesome, like, big deal. I have a friend who's been on the podcast a couple of times who got into Fantasia, and it's been interesting to see how that has like changed the trajectory of his career in like the best ways. So what has it been like working with the people in Fantasia and just, realizing that it's going to be on that stage?
I will have a better answer for you. I mean, once I've actually done it. I mean, it's really exciting. I mean, I've never been in a film festival before, so I also don't
Oh,
really
wow.
know.
What a first festival. That is incredible. Wow, that's awesome.
Thank you.
That's really cool.
I'm excited.
I've been at like small town festivals where like 10 people show up, including me and my friends. So I think you'll have a better experience than those. So I want to talk about sleep, which, like I said at the top of the episode, is how I found out about you and your work. Can you, for those who don't know, tell us about what sleep is and how that project came about?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty much going to be about 4 minutes short. That's one shot. And it's
Hmm.
about a woman who, it's very simple concept. A woman who is woken up in the middle of the night by a noise and starts kind of having this paranoid episode, thinking someone's there.
Yeah, and I read that it's inspired by your real life experience of when you were young, like a break-in happened in your house, like in broad daylight, right?
Yeah. It's not the same story at all. It's sort of
Yeah.
like, inspired by having those kinds of fears of someone breaking in and being attuned to being worried about that and the way that that kind of fear operates. But it's not the same story. Although I would like to tell that story and talk about that in something else. But this was sort of like a jumping off point, I guess you would say, and something just very achievable and very short.
That I know that is interesting going from isn't like I think I read that Thumb is like 10 minutes long ish.
And it's more like a proof of concept kind of thing for a feature, and sleep is really just what it is. And like I also just felt like I had seen a lot of shorts that I felt like were really effective and um, really scared me, like Lights Out, or which I mean it did get into a movie, but or like Remy Week's Pickle Monster, things like that, where I felt like I want to do something more like that. And you the pendulum swings where you do something that's a little bigger, and it's like trying to build this whole world. You're like, oh, I want to do something that's a lot smaller and different, and that vein. And so, but it was also definitely super inspired by doing Thumb, where like the most fun parts of it were, sitting around and doing some of the inserts with the actors and DP Julia Swain and the production designer Kyle Leeser. And I was just like really loved working with all of them and wanted to do
Hmm.
something again that like it wasn't like I like strategically thought like, ooh, how do I piece this together? But it was sort of like born out of really enjoying working with all of them and then
Hmm.
thinking about something that um, played to everybody's strengths.
No, I love that. So whenever you're writing, I'm curious how you see stories. Like when you're writing, are you only thinking about it from a writer's perspective, like thinking about the characters and the story elements and plot and that kind of stuff? Or when you're writing, are you imagining things visually? Like the idea of sleep being one continuous take or one shot, I should say, was that like from the get go, from whenever you first started writing, like you knew that that's the best way you wanted to portray it?
Yeah, I mean, it's like a little bit of a which came first, chicken or egg situation where I'm sort of like, it's not like I said to myself in my head, ooh, I'm gonna write something that's one shot and can be done in one day, so that X or Y, but it's like it just sort of comes together in that way where like I wouldn't have written, I don't think at that point I would have written something that needed to shoot for more than one day because I wanted to do something a lot smaller and easier, although it wasn't easy at all. It's never easy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
As I learned. No, I didn't think it was going to be easy, but I just, certain things that had been, I felt like I could streamline. I wanted to like be able to experiment with doing that. And what else can I answer to this question? I mean, but I mean, always having a screenplay structure, right? Like the script is 3 pages long and it has a first act, a second act, and a third act, and they're very distinct. And like it's really planned out, like even for being one shot and pretty much being all on Kate the whole time. And that also helps her build her performance, like understanding where those, having a script that makes it clear where those turns are. And
so I want to talk about the grant specifically, because I don't remember how exactly I found out about the Future of Film is Female, but I've been following them for a while, and they do these grants where they can help you out with, like, whether you have a script, help out with the pre-production costs or production or post. Your grant is specifically for post, and even more specifically for your color grade, right?
mm-hmm.
So how did you get involved with that organization? Like, did you submit to them? Did they reach out to you? Like, I'm curious what that process is like.
Our producer on the first one knew about it and had recommended it. And I had applied before and not, gotten funding, which I think is like important to admit and tell people that, like, I feel like a big part of how I've gotten farther in, whether it was in journalism or different things, is, you submit something and it's not quite right, or it's not the right time, mm-hmm. but then people know who you are and what you do and what you're capable of. And so mm-hmm. then, so then when we had finished Sleep and I had kind of like the raw footage, I sent it in and it's at night, obviously. So, or not obviously, but it does take place at night. And mm-hmm. so, the color is going to be really helpful.
For sure.
Have super amazing people working on.
Yeah. So, with these really awesome projects that are, like, obviously getting recognized by people who know what they're talking about, like, they're obviously good. That's a very cold take. But I'm curious, like, what is when you zoom out and have, like, the 30,000 foot view of your career, I'm curious, what is your, like, North Star as a filmmaker? The thing, like, the reason you keep making stuff, the reason you want to make stuff, and, like, what are you aiming for? Just why do you keep doing it? Because, as I say often, like, this is really hard, obviously. Talking about even Sleep, you wanted it to be shorter. It's still never easy. But I don't know. I always love asking people, what is the thing that carries them to keep making stuff and keep telling stories?
Yeah. I mean, I have a couple different answers, I guess, to that, which are, like, I feel like the thing that I used to hear the most in interviews like this from people is that you have to really need to do it, or else, it's not, I think I kind of felt like that about writing for magazines, right? Where there were just a lot mm-hmm. of aspects of it that I didn't need to do. And there were people who could kind of do it better. And I didn't, I wanted to, I loved it in a lot of ways, but it wasn't like a need. But I think, like, the main motivating thing is just seeing, I think, like, being in a conversation with people and ideas and filmmakers that I admire. And I feel like where a lot of ideas are coming from is feeling like I want to make something that's a little bit like this thing that I love, but a little bit like that. And then there's this experience that I had, or this artist that I, studied their work, and I don't really see that out there, and wanting to enter the conversation and to really and feel like you have a story to tell. I mean, that's just such a simple answer, but, like, I just feel like I have a lot of stories to tell. Like, that's what I was always like as a kid, like, with my dolls and arranging them around and, like, having little soap operas with them, and then running out of dolls storylines. Like, we were full up on projects on my bedroom floor. And so then I started, like, using my rock collection to, like, it's like the blue rock and the pink rock are having an affair, and, like, whatever.
Really highbrow experimental film.
But, like, I mean, like, that, I think that's the origin of, like, why people want to do this kind of work, is just really needing to tell a story.
No, I think, like, I don't think there's any, I think the simple answer is, like, the best one, and I love what you're saying about, the thing you want to make, you don't see, like, it doesn't exist. So, like, you're the best person to make it exist. Like, if you if your favorite film existed, then you wouldn't try to make it again or something. You know what I mean? So I think
Yeah,
that's,
I
I love
remember
that.
hearing someone I know say who was like a really talented editor saying like I would have been a novelist, but then I read this book that was like the thing that I would have wanted to write or was better, and I was just like, like. But I think that that drive. I mean, I think just also I'm a big reader, as you can see, and like I get pretty much say like most of my ideas from reading, unless they're inspired from my life, and like that just feels so much like you read something on the page and then you're kind of building the world in your mind and you have something to say or communicate or yeah just I mean a conversation.
Absolutely. So I'm curious what advice you have for young indie filmmakers like myself, who I just graduated last year. This is a very weird time to graduate from college. All my peers and I are, I shouldn't say all of them because I have some that are killing it, but we're just figuring it out. This is a weird time to figure out how to make things. It's never been more saturated, but it's also never been easier to make things. So what advice do you have to young filmmakers navigating the industry and who just want to start these conversations like you're just saying?
I mean, I'm assuming you're kind of talking about a writer director path. Just keep writing. Just write a lot of as much as you can. I mean, I've written a lot of things that are not out there, and I've learned a lot from doing that. And you can always, it doesn't cost anything to be really, really, really prepared and to invest in yourself in reading different books and listening to podcasts like this one and
Right.
like just, obviously that can, depending on what your situation is of like how much time you have to invest in yourself. But like, I think that, I mean, even in making Sleep, I thought about this a lot where it was like, it was pretty low budget and like, but I still, what we were able to like achieve, I felt really proud of. Like Kate and I rehearsed, multiple
Mm-hmm.
times. It's a 3-minute short, but
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't cost anything to meet up for 30 minutes and talk about each page of your, of the script and what's going on with it. And like, and I think that I guess my other note would be to like set yourself up for success and like try to make use of the talented people around you and write things and make things that play to their best strengths and listen to them. And, I've met some really amazing, feel really lucky to have met some really amazing people that I love.
Well, I love when you were talking about Sleep, like you wanted to make something, whether consciously or not, where like your collaborators could just like totally thrive in their positions. And I think like that's what we should all like. We should have each other's backs in the people that we're networking with, like our peers, and just constantly try to make those opportunities for people. So I think I love that.
I think, setting yourself up for success and setting your collaborators up for success, like giving them material that they can really shine with, and then everybody's bouncing off of each other. Like, I mean, Julia is awesome, and Kyle is awesome, and Zach and Kate, and these are, I'm just, and Jacqueline, and all the people that I worked with on Thumb, and yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. This has been really exciting. I feel like I'm catching you at an interesting part of your career because I know it's only going to just like keep skyrocketing after this. So congrats on Fantasia. That's so huge. As the first festival to be getting into, that's like, I mean, that's incredible. That's really awesome. So it's very exciting to see. And yeah, this episode should be coming out around the time that it's playing. So we'll have links in the description to get tickets, and of course links to your website so people can check out your work and all of that fun stuff. But this has been so much fun. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me again.
Yeah, of course. Everyone, thank you again for listening. If you listening or watching, if you only listened, you should check out our YouTube channel to see some behind the scenes content from Allie's work, and subscribe to our YouTube channel and all that fun stuff. New episodes come out every Monday. So thank you again for listening, and Allie, thanks again for being here.
Thank you.